The brand new HRV Pod 4 is a significant upgrade over the Pod 3 with more features like new temperature controls and an adjustable base, faster cooling, and if you get the Ultra version, the ability to reduce your snoring or maybe more importantly your partner's snoring as well. The HRV Pod 3 has been my favorite sleep improvement device for a while now, so let's see if the Pod 4 can improve on this. Similar to the Pod 3, the Pod 4 simply wraps around your mattress and provides temperature control, health tracking and much more. In this video we will take a look at those new features and scientifically review the Pod 4 Ultra. We will independently and systematically test the sleep stage tracking, the heart rate and the heart rate variability accuracy and the breathing rate measurements. And of course we'll take a look at one of the most interesting features, snore reduction. Finally, we'll also look at the patterns of cooling and heating of the Pod 4 and how that correlates with my core body temperature. I'll also discuss who should upgrade their older generation Pod to the Pod 4, and Pod 3 owners will be happy to hear that even though the Pod 4 is better for sure, the Pod 3 is still good enough in most situations, but it depends. Before moving on, it's important to mention that HRV sent me the Pod 4 Ultra for free, and I'll add a discount affiliate link below, which will give you the best discount I'm aware of, and I'll also earn a commission, which helps support this channel. However, HRV did not have any influence on this video, nor did I get to see it before release, and I always try to be as independent as possible, but I wanted to be transparent. Now, before starting the testing, let me give you an overview of the Pod 4's and Pod 4 Ultra's features and improvements over the Pod 3. One of the main new introductions is the tap to control feature. If you tap twice on a sensor on either side of the bed, that side will cool down further, or if you triple tap, it will warm up. And these actions are always confirmed by a vibration motor. This means you don't have to get your phone out during the night to make adjustments to the temperature. This tapping can also be used to mute the alarm, and if you get the Ultra version, a quadruple tap will actually change the position of the bed. You might be wondering what this Ultra version is. Well, the Pod 4 will come in two versions, the normal Pod 4 and the Pod 4 Ultra, which also includes an adjustable base that can elevate both the head and the feet. You can use that for reading and lounging, for instance, which can even be automatically activated every day before bedtime, which is a feature I love. However, the most important function of the adjustable bed is that it can reduce snoring. The way it works is that the Pod 4 detects vibrations from the snoring and will gently elevate you, and it tries to do that without waking you up. This ranges from angles of about 6 to 15 degrees, with the pillow of course adding additional elevation. Now, elevating the head like this has been used to help with snoring and obstructive sleep apnea for some time, but with the Pod 4 the bed is only raised temporarily until the snoring resolves and then it goes back down. So you don't need a bed that is constantly raised on one side. In addition to these snoring features, the Pod 4 boasts about 40% more sensors than the Pod 3 with better shielding from interference. HRV says that the heart rate and heart rate variability tracking have been significantly improved through deep learning, which enhances heart rate beat-to-beat intervals and potentially improves sleep staging accuracy. But of course we will put all of this to the test, and we're almost ready to look at these tests, but there are a few more important things you need to know first about the Pod 4. I noticed three main improvements. First of all, the cover is now almost impossible to feel when you sleep, making it more comfortable than the Pod 3, though I personally had no issue sleeping on the Pod 3 either. Second, the cooling and heating now happens much faster, and the uniformity of the heating and cooling are also supposed to be much better in this new design. Finally, the Pod 4 is just much more quiet, which is the thing I really noticed. I still have to quantify it, but HRV claims it's about 40% quieter than the Pod 3. Okay, those are the things you need to know, but on this channel we don't just blindly trust what manufacturers tell us, but we do independent testing of the health features. By the way, for those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. I want to start by testing the things that are easiest for the Pod 4 to do and then gradually move on to things that are harder for it to do. So I'll start with the most basic measurement, which is heart rate, and then move on to more difficult measurements like heart rate variability and breathing rate. After that, we'll test the hardest type of measurement, which is sleep stage tracking. Now, just conceptually, I think it's pretty amazing. We have technology nowadays that can measure heart rate just through your bed, but of course it needs to be reliable. So let's see how the Pod 4 did in terms of heart rate tracking. Here we have an overview of the performance of the Pod 4 when it comes to heart rate tracking. Now, to test the heart rate measurements of the Pod 4, I tracked my heartbeats using an ECG chest strap, and I tried to calculate my heart rate in a very similar manner to how the Pod 4 defines heart rate. Now, along the horizontal axis is the heart rate as measured by the chest strap, and on the vertical axis is my heart rate according to the Pod 4, with each dot being a single heart rate measurement. Now, the closer the points are to the blue line, the better the agreement. As you can see, there's generally a very good agreement between the pod 4 and the ECG chest straps, though the points tend to be slightly underneath the blue line, indicating that the pod 4 systematically detected a slightly lower heart rate, but if there is a difference, this is generally only maybe 1 BPM, and most of the time it's more or less spot on. We can also quantify this agreement by looking at the correlation, which is this R value up here. As you can see, the correlation is 0.94, which is really good since the correlation cannot be higher than 1. Now this is all based on 3 individual nights, and here you can see the first example night I wanted to share with you. Along the horizontal axis is the clock time and my heart rate is on the vertical axis, with in red the measurements according to the H-Sleep pod 4 and in blue-green the measurements according to the chest strap. And as you can see, the overall patterns look very similar. Most deviation is by 1 or 2 BPM, but overall this night looks very good. And we see more or less the same thing for this second example night, only near the end here do we see quite a bit more deviation. But this is likely because I left the bed to use the restroom, so in those moments it's just impossible for the H-Sleep pod 4 to measure those higher heart rates when I'm walking. So I was out of the bed, and I might also have moved for a while to my partner's side of the bed, so then it's also impossible for the H-Sleep to detect my heart rate. So in terms of heart rate tracking, I'm very happy with the performance of the H-Sleep pod 4. I just think it's super cool that something that's not attached to your body can measure your heart rate so accurately. However, what's much more difficult to measure is heart rate variability. For heart rate, we just need to know the number of heartbeats, but for heart rate variability, we need to know the exact distance between the heartbeats. Heart rate variability, or HRV in short, measures the variations in time between consecutive heartbeats, reflecting the heart's adaptability to stress and change in activity. A higher HRV is generally good, indicating a robust autonomic nervous system and cardiovascular health, showing the body's good stress management and adaptability. But are the H-Sleep pod 4 sensors precise enough to measure the individual heartbeats? Let's take a look. This is a similar plot to before, but in this case we're looking at heart rate variability and not heart rate, with each dot being a sort of 15-minute average heart rate variability. Again, we're using the polar H10 as a reference on the x-axis and the pod 4 is on the vertical axis. And again, overall we see a really good agreement between the pod 4 and the ECG chest strap. Most points are on or close to the blue line, and the correlation is still very high at 0.89. It's slightly lower than before, but overall looking very good. Only here in the higher heart rate variability range does the H-Sleep detect a slightly higher HRV. So overall this is not looking bad, but let's take a look at the individual nights to see why it sometimes detects a too high HRV. And here we have the first example night where we indeed see very similar patterns between the pod 4 in red and the ECG chest strap in blue-green. There's some variation, but nothing I would be too worried about. I don't know all the details of how H-Sleep calculates their HRV, so I try to get as close as possible in my calculations, but that could also be part of the reason for some of the variation. For this second night, we see more or less the same thing, but unfortunately the ECG device lost connection with my phone after some hours. But in the beginning, I think it still looks pretty decent, but you have to judge for yourself, of course. However, for this third and final night, we see some more variation, where the pod 4 detected higher peaks than the ECG chest strap. So that's why we saw that increased variation in the higher HRV range. Now, I'm not sure why this night in particular is different, but here we definitely see a bit of difference between both devices. The general patterns are still the same, but the peaks are different for the H-Sleep in this case. Now, I could only test the pod 4 for a limited number of days so far, but the HRV measurements generally look good enough in my opinion. I'm curious about that one more deviant night, so I want to do more testing in the future. Next, I want to take a look at breathing rate, also called the respiratory rate. Now, breathing rate is not something I have a good reference for. However, I can calculate a rough breathing rate based on my heart rate patterns, because as you breathe in, your heart rate increases, and as you breathe out, it decreases. In fancy terms, this is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. That increase in heart rate during inhalation helps to move incoming blood through the heart and into the lungs more quickly for oxygenation. But for us, it just matters we can get an independent estimate of my breathing rate. And here we see that comparison between the breathing rate based on the ECG chest strap on the bottom and that measured by the H-Sleep on the left. Now, I only have a single average value per hour, which is each of these dots right here, but we generally see a pretty good agreement between both. There is one very deviant measurement right here, but all the others are very close to the blue line. The correlation is quite a bit lower now at 0.75, but this is probably mostly due to this one deviant point. Still, overall, it's not looking bad. And again, we get a better impression of that by looking at the individual nights themselves. And here we can see the first one. Again, the pod 4 is in red and the polar H10 is in blue-green. And as you can see, the patterns generally look very similar, so I'm happy with that. Now, for this second night, it also generally looks pretty decent. Only near the end here do we see more deviation. However, as we know, near the end, I left the bed a few times, so it makes sense that the pod 4 measured a lower breathing rate there on average, and I might also have moved to Teresa's side for a bit. So this is looking pretty good in terms of respiratory rate as well. Now I need to find a better reference for breathing rate in the future, but this calculation based on heart rate shows us the pod 4 seems to be doing a quite good job for respiratory rate. However, what is even more difficult for a tracker to measure is your sleep stages. This is because this is normally measured using your brain waves, but sleep trackers need to estimate your sleep stages based on things like heart rate and movement. So let's see if the H-Sleep Pod 4 is up to the task. But before showing you this, I hope my diligent testing has earned a subscribe from you. And if you have a few seconds, a comment or even just a quick like would really help. Now back to the testing. And here I show an overview of the sleep test results. Now as always, to test the sleep stage tracking performance, I'll compare the H-Sleep Pod 4 against the ZMax EEG headband, which can actually measure my brain waves. Now this device also has its limitations, especially when it comes to detecting awake time, but it will give us a general impression of the sleep stage tracking performance of the Pod 4. Now in total, I have 6 nights of data to test the Pod 4. On top we have the sleep stages as recorded by the ZMax EEG device, and on the left the sleep stages as recorded by the H-Sleep Pod 4. And each column here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the ZMax was predicted as each sleep stage by the Pod 4. And if they perfectly agree, all values along the diagonal should be 100%. Now as always, we're not going to look at awake time because the ZMax overestimates awake moments. Now first of all, we see that about 61% of what was deep sleep according to the ZMax was also detected as deep sleep by the H-Sleep Pod 4, so that's pretty decent. And basically all the deep sleep that was predicted differently was predicted as light sleep instead. Now light sleep agreement is really good at about an 80% agreement, and most confusion in this case is with either REM sleep or deep sleep. REM sleep agreement is also really good at 77%. And this is really good because most devices struggle most with REM sleep, so this percentage is actually quite high, and any disagreement is basically with light sleep. And as I said, we're not going to focus on awake time, but just for completeness, we can see a 44% agreement. But let's take a look at the individual nights because this will really show us what the patterns of the sleep stage tracking look like in the Pod 4. And here you can see the first night I wanted to share with you. On top we have the sleep stages according to the ZMax EEG headband, with along the horizontal axis the clock time and my sleep stages on the vertical axis. And on the bottom we have a similar plot, but now for the Pod 4. And in purple I highlighted deep sleep as recorded by the EEG device. And as you can see, there's generally a pretty good agreement. So the first 2 deep sleep segments match really well between the ZMax and the H-Sleep Pod 4. Only the ZMax detects a bit of extra deep sleep right here that the Pod 4 didn't detect. But overall pretty decent agreement, I would say. And for this second example night, we see more or less the same thing. So these first 2 deep sleep segments match between the EEG device and the Pod 4, but the EEG device detects a bit of extra deep sleep. And for this night, I'm actually a bit afraid that the EEG device detected too much deep sleep later in the night. So I got a new unit of this ZMax EEG device, and somehow I'm getting more deep sleep than I'm used to. So I have to figure out if there's a systematic problem with the ZMax here. But overall, this gives me some confidence that the Pod 4 can detect your deep sleep. And as we saw for REM sleep, it generally performs even better. So in red now I marked the REM sleep as detected by the ZMax. And as you can see for this night, basically all segments match between the EEG device and the Pod 4. So that's really good. And we see more or less the same thing for this second example night. So for this night, basically all of the REM sleep detected by the EEG device was also detected by the Pod 4. And that's also what we see for this last example night right here, where only this first sliver of REM sleep isn't detected, but otherwise it matches pretty well. And that also means that for most nights, we will be able to see our sleep cycles based on just the data from the Pod 4. So you go through multiple of these sleep cycles each night, each one starting with light sleep and deep sleep marked here in blue, and each one ending in REM sleep marked here in red. And as you can see for this night, I most likely went through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sleep cycles. And most of these we would be able to see based on just the data from the Pod 4. Only because it did miss this short sliver of REM sleep right here, we would have some trouble seeing that these are 2 cycles and not 1. But overall, not bad performance at all. And as I said, we're not going to focus on the awake time, but generally what we see is that the time I fall asleep and the time I wake up matches pretty well between the Pod 4 and the EEG device. And some of these awake moments detected by the EEG device are also detected by the Pod 4. But again, I think the EEG device overestimates these awake moments. So overall, I'm really quite happy with the sleep stage tracking performance of the Pod 4. The Pod 3 was already good and the Pod 4 seems to be performing similarly. The deep sleep detection seems to be struggling a bit more, but I also noticed the replacement ZMax EEG device I recently received tends to detect a bit more deep sleep than I'm used to, so it might actually be an over-detection of deep sleep by the reference. Still, overall the results are in line with my experience with H-Sleep. It seems to be a solid and reliable sleep stage tracker, at least on me. However, we can quantify this by comparing this to the performance of many of the other devices out there. And that's exactly what we can see right here. This graph shows you an overview of the agreement of different watches and trackers with different EEG and PSG ESG references. Along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. Now, the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. And this overview is slightly complicated because I use different reference devices. The devices not marked in any color were tested against the Dream 2 EEG headband, which is my go-to reference, but Dream went bankrupt, so I cannot use it anymore. The devices marked in blue-purple were tested against polysomnography, so the gold standard in sleep stage tracking. And the devices marked in green were tested using the Z-Max EEG headband, so the one we used in this video. And we can see the 8-sleep pod 4 right here, so it is towards the upper right and very close to the pod 3. And I expect both are basically performing the same, so there's a slight bit of distance between the two, but given the few nights of data I have for the pod 4 and the many nights I have for the pod 3, I actually think both of them more or less perform the same. The Apple Watch is potentially even doing a tiny bit better on me, but the difference isn't huge. And also the Nuco app is doing very well. The Oura Ring is also a really good tracker, so my top 4 I would say are Apple, Nuco, 8Sleep and Oura, and that's followed closely by, for instance, several Fitbit devices and the Whoop strap. And then there's quite a few worse performing watches down here. So on me at least, it's clear that the 8Sleep Pod 4 and Pod 3 are pretty good sleep stage trackers. So the 8Sleep Pod 4 appears to be among some of the top performers when it comes to sleep stage tracking, very similar to the Pod 3 actually. I'm quite satisfied with all measurements of the Pod 4 so far, but what about the snoring detection and the intervention by raising the bed? Well, this is something I haven't been able to test in detail, but I do want to share some anecdotal data. I was able to test the Pod 4 on myself for a total of about 7 days before making this video, and in all those days I only snored bad enough one time for the system to activate. The app showed that it stopped the snoring by raising the bed, but it's difficult to determine cause and effect here. So in order to improve my odds, I asked 2 notorious snorers to test the Pod 4. The first one being Shervin from the Shervin Shares YouTube channel. He tested it for a single night, and although he did snore more than me, it wasn't enough to get the bed to raise. You can see in the app it said he snored about 9% of the entire time he was asleep. So if that isn't enough, next I tried the nuclear option. That's why I asked my colleague Francesco to sleep at mine for a night. Now, I've slept in the same room as Franci before, or I should say I've tried to sleep in the same room as Francesco before, so I knew he was my best chance. Are you excited to test the bed? Are you ready for bed?
Looking forward to test the bed.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can finally stop to snore.
And I'm happy to report that Francesco delivered, snoring a whopping 47% of the time he was asleep according to the 8Sleep app. And as you can see right here, basically the only time he didn't snore for a while was when he was awake. But still, the bass only rose one time, and this indeed stopped the snoring according to the app. Francesco actually mentioned partially waking up from this, and he remembered the bass feeling a bit higher at some point. And as you can see, he wasn't happy waking up. So he turned around and gave the camera the ultimate FU gesture. So I asked the folks at 8Sleep why there were so few interventions for Francesco, and they actually said that for new users, there's a gradual ramp up in the number of interventions and the degree of elevation. This is also to let the AI system learn how well it works on the user's snoring and if they wake up because of it, which helps determine the right sensitivity and frequency. So the actual testing of this will have to wait for my long-term review when the Pod 4 is calibrated correctly on me. Now, we haven't discussed the main reason why I personally have been using the 8Sleep system since 2021, starting with the Pod 2 back then, and that's for the cooling and heating functionalities. I get hot in bed very easily and I really suffer in summer, and the 8Sleep has been a godsend for that. In Northern Europe, we generally don't have air conditioning, and even if I did, I tend to need a much cooler room than any partner I've had so far. Before I had an 8Sleep system, in winter I would literally let my room get to a few degrees above freezing, so it'd be nice and fresh in the room, but my partners weren't always happy with that. So I wanted to see how the 8Sleep Pod 4 regulated my bed's temperature and how that correlated with my skin and core body temperature. And you can see that for one night right here. On the left, we have 2 different bed temperature measurements, and on the right, 2 different body temperature measurements. But let's focus on the left first. So this is the temperature of the bed itself, in red as measured by the Pod 4, and in green as measured by an external sensor I put under my pillow. I'm not sure if this is the best location, but this is the only place I could put it. And we have the temperature on the vertical axis with degrees Celsius right here and Fahrenheit right here. And as you can see, before I actually went to bed, the Pod 4 started heating itself, getting ready for me to about 20 26 degrees Celsius or 80 Fahrenheit. Then as I fell asleep and got into deep sleep, it cooled it down by about 1.5 degrees. Then as I got closer to waking up, the bed got warmer again. So this is exactly how it was pre-programmed. And this matches somewhat with my core body temperature on the right, plotted in cyan right here. Now this is measured with the core sensor, which is definitely not perfect, but it should give us a rough impression of my core body temperature. And indeed, we see that as I fell asleep, my core body temperature dropped, and then it stayed more or less stable over the night, maybe increasing a little bit near the end. We also have my skin temperature in purple, but this isn't really that interesting for us. It's really my core temperature I'm interested in. And we actually see something similar for this second night, though I actually believe I set the temperature for this night to drop more. And we indeed see a stronger drop in temperature here in the middle of the night, cooling down a lot more. And we can also see that my core body temperature again behaves similarly. So it drops quite quickly and then stays more or less stable throughout the night, maybe increasing a little bit towards the end of the night. And finally, I want to look at this night. This I found really interesting because it's different from the other nights. I actually had to change the temperature of the bed throughout the night because it was way too hot. As you can see, that drop started around 3:30 a.m., which matches with what I recorded using my infrared camera. Interestingly, my core body temperature right here appears to have risen more throughout the night, which might be one of the reasons I felt so hot. Now, all these temperature measurements don't really prove anything about the Pod 4 itself. I just found it super interesting to see how my core body temperature and bed temperature varied. As a final test, I want to compare the Pod 4 against the Oura Ring, another very popular smart tracker, since many of you might be wondering how the Oura Ring's measurements compare to the Pod 4. By the way, if you're interested in the latest updates on the wearables I'm testing, I'm planning to start back up with my newsletter and posting more off-the-cuff things on my Instagram and my YouTube Shorts channel. So if you're interested in any of those are linked below. Now, back to the testing. Let's start by looking at heart rate, and here you can see an overview of that with the Oura Ring along the horizontal axis and the Pod 4 on the vertical axis. And as you can see, both are super similar. Almost all points are at least close to the blue line and most are even on the blue line. The correlation is again pretty good at 0.94, so a very good agreement between what the Oura Ring measured and the HRV Pod 3 measured. And looking at the individual nights themselves, we can indeed see that the patterns are very similar. So here we have the HRV Pod 4 in red and the Oura Ring in blue-green. And as you can see, for most of the night, the measurements are overlapping very well. And that's generally what we see for most nights. Also, this night right here shows a very good agreement between both devices. And that's also what we see for this last example right here. So overall, the Oura Ring and the HRV Pod 4 give similar results for heart rate tracking. Interestingly, in terms of HRV, there is a bit more variation when we compare the Oura Ring 3 to the HRV Pod 4. As you can see, the patterns are generally still pretty similar, but there is a bit more deviation. But this isn't actually that big a problem because we tend to look at the average or median heart rate variability over the night, and this will likely give very similar patterns to both devices. So if one of the two devices shows a large increase or decrease in HRV, the other one would likely show the same thing. Also, the exact way that the Oura Ring and the Pod 4 calculate their HRV values might not be the same, so that might have an influence as well on why the correlation isn't as high, but it's still pretty good. And if we look at the individual nights for the HRV measurements, we can indeed see that there's a bit more deviation between the Pod 4 and the Oura Ring 3 compared to what we saw for heart rate. But I think to a large degree this is because the Pod 4 and the Oura Ring 3 average the HRV over different frequencies. So the Oura Ring has many more points here, giving much more detailed variation, whereas the Pod 4 takes averages over a longer period. So it's just a bit of a more smooth line when you visualize it. And that's also what we see for this second example night right here. But overall, the patterns are actually very similar. In terms of overall tracking performance, the Oura Ring and the Pod 4 are really close, and the decision between both really depends on your personal goal. If you just want to be able to track your sleep metrics and you feel comfortable wearing a ring, the Oura Ring is a cheaper option and the dashboard is actually really good. If you want to actually actively regulate the temperature of your bed and at the same time get great tracking without having to wear anything on your body, the Pod 4 is a great choice, but it's not cheap. And I'll tell you more about that and my final conclusions in a second. However, I do have to mention that there are limitations to my testing. The main ones being that I just tested the Pod 4 on me and only for a limited time, so it might perform differently on you. But okay, what are my final conclusions? Well, the Pod 4 is a great tracker, similar to the Pod 3. The H-Sleep system has been the best single improvement for my sleep quality, and I expect the Pod 4 to do at least as well as the Pod 3. I love that I'm now able to control the temperature from the side of the bed without getting my phone out, so I would definitely pick the Pod 4 over the Pod 3. So if you're new to the H-Sleep system and you're considering getting one, this is a great time to do just that. Rob from the future here. I've had some more days to test the Pod 4, and while editing I had some ideas that I wanted to add quickly. So first of all, one thing I noticed while cooling down the bed at night is that I'm not sure if you cool down the bed by say 2 times 2 taps, if it actually cools down the whole night or just for that segment of the night. So normally in the app I would set different temperatures for different parts of the night, and I'm not sure if I cool it down for one part of the night if it's cooled down for all or not. So once or twice when I was really warm and I wanted to make sure it was cooled down for the entire night, I still went back to my phone so the tapping wasn't enough, but I'll ask 8sleep how it actually works and I'll put that in the description below. The second thing I wanted to say is that not everybody can afford this whole setup. So there are cheaper systems out there potentially that don't do the tracking but just the cooling, for instance, so you might want to look into that. And there's also some zero cost options like taking a warm shower before bed that might help. And finally, I wanted to briefly discuss who I think the Ultra version of the bed is for and who should just get the normal Pod 4. I think I, as a not so heavy snorer, would probably have gone for the one without the base, so the normal Pod 4. I really love my Pod 3 and I love the Pod 4 even a little bit more, though probably I wouldn't have invested the money to upgrade. But for me as a non-snorer, also that extra base probably wouldn't be worth it. But if you or your partner is a heavy snorer, then it might be worth looking into the base and just trying it out and see if it works for you. And I realize that I'm in a very fortunate position that I have this and I can use this for reading and lounging in bed before I go to sleep. But in the end, it's really up to you what your priorities are if you want to get the base or not. I don't know about the European prices, but in the USA, depending on what model you get, just the Pod 4 by itself will cost you about $2,500. And if you go for the Pod 4 Ultra with the adjustable base, this will set you back just north of $4,000. And all of this excludes a membership of $15 a month, which is needed for most of the functionalities. Having used the 8sleep pod systems for quite some years now, it would definitely be worth it for me personally, because I know it helps improve my sleep, but I get it's a lot of money. So if you do decide to get a Pod 4 or Pod 4 Ultra, you might want to use my $100 discount code below, which combined with the evergreen discount that's currently on the site will give you a total of $150 off, that it might be more or less depending on when you watch this video. Given that you watched this whole video on the HRV Pod 4, check out my original video on the Pod 3 right here, or this video on my top recommendations for sports and health tracking. Thank you so much for watching and catch you in the next video.